Welcome to India Rural Colloquy 2022. Today's conversation on big society, compact to deliver sustainable development, will begin shortly. Before we begin, we'd like to present the colloquy anthem. So please sit back and enjoy.
जनता का आह्वान किया, वर्षों जकड़ी बेड़ियों को अब तो तोड़ो। क्रांति की मशाल जला गांधी बोले, अंग्रेजों भारत छोड़ो। बहुत सहा गुलामी को अब ना सहेंगे, आजादी की बात रही वो लेके रहेंगे। अगस्त की बेला में हम सौगंध उठाते हैं, सशक्त राष्ट्र के सपने को चलो मिलकर आज सजाते हैं। हर युवा को रोजगार मिले, हर नारी की आजादी हो, हर घर स्वास्थ्य सबल बने, ये गली गली मुनादी हो। हो, जन जन स्वाभिमानी हो, देश में ना रहे गरीबी, विकास ही अपनी निशानी हो। एक क्रांति फिर ऐसी हो, रगों में वही रवानी हो, कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर सबने बस यही ठानी हो। अगस्त की बेला में हम सौगंध उठाते हैं, सशक्त राष्ट्र के सपने को चलो मिलकर आज सजाते हैं। हर युवा को रोजगार मिले, हर नारी की आजादी हो, हर घर स्वास्थ्य सबल बने, ये गली गली मुनादी हो।
Anirban, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. On behalf of Transforming Rural India Foundation, I, Anirban, welcome you to the second edition of the India Rural Colloquy, which at this time of the year we are commemorating the call for Quit India, which led to the world's largest mobilization of citizens for a cause. We are having exciting discussions on critical issues of rural for the past 3 days. Today, this panel looks at TRIF's founding belief that multiple sectors and multiple actors need to come together for transforming the lives of poor people residing in rural areas. Last few years, the government has laid down the foundation for the digital spine, the JAM Trinity, the Swamitwa card, the agri stack and the health stack are on the cards. So, in this context, the engagement of Samaj Sarkar Bazaar needs to shift. And I see these shifts already visible in several areas we work on the ground. We can't have a better panel to discuss these eminent shifts and the potential to accelerate the change processes on the ground. We are honored to have the Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. Anant Nageshwaran, Vineet Rai, who is the founder of India's largest social impact fund, Anurag Beher, who leads the Azim Premji Foundation and has been a deep thinker in the development space, and R. Venkatraman, who currently leads Karkinos Healthcare. This eminent panel will be in conversation with Rohini Nerikani, who has been talking about Samaj Sarkar Bazaar for a while now. And interestingly, today she has released a book on this topic. My colleagues will share, in the interest of saving time, my colleagues will share a link providing more details about the speakers. And I will share a link of the Rohini's book, which has just been released earlier today. Before I hand over this conversation to Rohini, I would just take your time for housekeeping. You will have opportunity to ask questions to the panelists during the session. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the control panel to ask either specific questions to individuals panelists or generic questions you would like the panelists to address. To the extent possible, the panelists will attempt to respond to those questions, and whatever is left, our backend team will ensure that the questions are answered and placed in the Rural Colloquy second edition book. Handing it over to you, Rohini. Looking forward to an exciting discussion and a session forward. Over to you, Rohini. Rohini, you're muted.
Dhanyawad and namaste. Thank you, Anirban. Thank you to TRIF. I'm very honored to be moderating this rather eminent panel and look forward to a very good conversation amongst all of them. It's not just me asking questions. We have a very important subject to discuss, which is the big society of the people public compact for sustainable development. Really, I think the words big society should not mislead us. I don't think they're referring to kind of the British Conservative Party's idea of the big society, which was less government and more society. I think here we are trying to say, what can Samaj and Sarkar do together? And what is the role of Bazaar to achieve the common goals we have for the 1.4 billion people of this country? And today, because this is the India Rural Colloquy, we are looking at the fates, destinies, and aspirations of 600 plus million rural Indians and their futures. So the way we're going to use this 1 hour, because some panelists have to leave early, is all four of the panelists will do short opening comments, and then we'll do a kind of a free flow so that all their insights can come in and hopefully also inform the work of TRIF going forward. So I very much look forward to it, and I'm going to ask you, Venkat, to first come in with your opening comments. From your great experience at the Tata Trust and now what you're now doing in healthcare, how do you think this people-public compact should play out, especially for our rural citizens?
Thanks, Oni. It's indeed a great pleasure and honor to connect and reconnect with a number of eminent people, some of whom I've been seeing after a long time. Anurag, good to see you again. I would start off by one particular word or term about what we call normally as aspiration or ummeed, and if my Hindi is right, from a South Indian. One doesn't need to go beyond what a few days ago I read in Honorable Prime Minister's blog or MyGov website as to what inspired or what inspires him to work relentlessly the way he does for the common man. He was narrating a story many years ago when he had, amongst his many travels, been at Baroda. He had a number of rural migrant workers wanting to go to the city for daily labor or daily coolie, where they assemble at one place and want to take a bus and go to a different place. There were many buses coming in, which are, they call as normal Moffisil buses, one point to another, which literally stop at every time. And as you know, the normal state ST buses, by the look and feel of it, and they would not have been cleaned for months or weeks, as the case might be. None of the people wanted to get into those concerned Moffisil buses, but they were waiting for an express bus. These fellows think they're with has a nice cushion seat and goes from a point A to point B, though it might be a little costly or may pinch their pocket much more than what it currently is. We often, in our quest for engagement with rural or some of the downtrodden, as the case might be, assume to get into an intervention of an LCM. I think some of the time, some of my colleagues will also, as the least common multiple of a engagement, whereas their aspirations, if given a choice, would want to be amongst the best and the brightest as well. So how do we connect these aspirations? And Anirban, if you recall, even our own genesis of TRF had been in one of the rural things at Gumla or Gufu, where the women point blank told on our face, if you don't come back to me with a monthly income of 50,000 plus, I have your phone number, I'll give you a call. Thank you, bye-bye. It was straight on our face. We were all thinking we are doing great development work and I'm coming to help you and downtrodden and all. They literally have their aspirations almost a decade ago, which we were not imagining or trying to get a hang of it. So I think especially in this knowledge-driven society, where again, thanks to Nandan, what he has done on financial inclusion and a whole range of things, just on the face of a mobile, everyone has everything. How do we constantly meet and or exceed those aspirations without getting too much biased on so many WhatsApp universities keep coming in a curated, knowledge-driven, with a deep sense of purpose? So that's been a constant challenge. Means we face that in agriculture and livelihood initiatives in the trust. Now in a little bit of my healthcare aspirations, they want the best of treatment as what they would get in a max at a price point of a Safdarjung hospital. If one were to, how do you get that and make it affordable, accessible with a degree of clinical quality, which otherwise they won't get anywhere? So that's the new India today. So how do we embrace that and first of all acknowledge that, especially in the development circles, where many of our textbooks and our knowledge has all been in the 1936 or pre-independence era knowledge curations that we have had. So that's been a constant personal challenge. I'm sure many in the sector also might be seeing it or believing it. These are a few initial thoughts when you would love to learn more, and look forward to reading your book as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. By the way, the book is also available free, but you can also buy it. Anurag, let's move to you now. You have traveled deeply and widely in this country. What is the delta between people's aspirations and what both what all Samaj, Sarkar and even Bazaar are able to offer, and what more needs to be done? Anurag, you're on mute. Can you hear us, Anurag? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you, Rohini. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm in a place where the connection is quite unstable.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much.
That's part of the story. That's part of the story, I guess.
This is rural India where I am right now. Okay. So it's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I think it's a the matter that we're talking about is perhaps the challenge of the century. So yeah, I think it's truly the challenge of the century. And it's a challenge because we know what larger population we have in rural India. We know the economic necessities of development. We know that there is no simple pathway forward for the agrarian economy to move to a more productive, more value-added, therefore more remunerative, set of livelihoods. There's no straightforward path forward that we know of. There's climate change, very much right here. And then we have the extraordinary challenges of equity. So I think it is just an extraordinary challenge. I mean, it's truly, I think, the challenge of the century. So I feel first, we need to have an imagination of what is this goal, what is the, end state might be too definitive, but what is the direction? What is the imagination of this transformed rural India that we are talking about? I haven't been able to, come to an imagination that I can grapple with in reality. But I think that's the task of this whole collaborative effort that we have. But I think that imagination to which the country aligns is very critical. And that imagination must also account for the fact that we must not tread the path of, and I'm just saying something which all of us are familiar with, we must not tread the path of development, the kind that's happened over the past 100 odd years, which has led to the climate crisis, to equity. So what is it that we should do so that we do not foster the same kind of forces? At the same time, and that's to my mind, I mean, to my heart, it's a very particularly important point, that what is it that this development path, this change path that we are talking about, must preserve that is good, must preserve good as cultural, good as in the what is good life, across our wonderful country. And I think that has not been paid adequate heed to in the past. Lastly, I think from an imagination perspective, it's very, very critical, I think, to recognize, appreciate that we are talking about a significant educational and cultural imagination. What we are talking about, which will take perhaps a couple of generations, is not going to happen just because we look at economic parameters or interventions or even public systems. It is a mobilized educational, cultural endeavor that we need to think of. So to me, these are some of the characteristics of the imagination. I don't have that imagination.
I think he's frozen. Vineet, do you want to pick up? He's, I think, saying he doesn't have all the answers, but he's asked some great questions. He'll come back, I'm sure. Vineet, to me, you represent Bazaar. Okay, sorry. You want to finish, Anurag?
Yeah, I want to finish. Thank you so much.
We lost you there. We lost you.
Okay, I'm audible. So if we have this imagination, we need to have an approach to make this real. And I'm deliberately not jumping to implementation. So that we have to have an approach that makes it real. And I think some of the key parts of that approach, I think, is that we need to have vibrant institutions on the ground. We need to invest adequately in the front line, on the ground, right? When we think of investment, I think we must prioritize investment on the ground in the front line. And another thing which certainly is my bias comes from education, which is my field of work, that, it's an interesting thing. Equity leads quality. So if you ensure equity, quality will happen, right? So that's approach, imagination approach. And from an implementation perspective, just a couple of things. One, that we must be fully aware that this is not a technocratic exercise we are embarking on, or will be embarking on. It is, it's a hugely socio-cultural, humanistic exercise, right? Mm-hmm. Lastly, decisions must be as close to the ground as possible, right? So have imagination, develop an approach, implement, and I've just, briefly touched upon what I think are important parts of that. So thanks, Rohini.
Thank you. Thank you, Anurag. Vineet, over to you. You have represented Bazaar in a way where Bazaar is close to the people. You have done a lot of work on financial inclusion, on social impact-driven organizations. You've got big markets to follow you into the small Bazaar side. And you have a sense of what the Bazaar can bring in to achieve some of these goals. Your thoughts, Vineet, briefly.
Yeah, thanks, Rohini, and lovely to hear Venkat and Anurag, and of course look forward to listening to Anand following me. But I think the most important thing that I'm trying to connect my takeaways with what Anurag and Venkat have said. So start with aspiration. The pyramid of aspiration in rural India is flat. Today, what people sitting in urban India expect, the same people anywhere in India do, because the communication has allowed that to happen. Unfortunately, the resource and opportunity pyramid continue to stay as they are. That means if you are in rural India, some people may have resources, but a large number of people may not have resources. But when it comes to opportunity pyramid, there is a huge and significant gap between when you are in urban India and you are in rural India. So when you look from a market's perspective or capital perspective or the way you want to intervene, I think the first question that you need to ask is who's your customer and what do they want? And that ties into what Anurag was saying. So what does a person living in rural India wants? And if you are not able to satisfy that want, and to Venkat actually referred to it as they want the higher quality services at the lowest price point, which is not very different from what the urban customer wants. The difference lies in actually the gap in the density. So when you go to rural India, the gaps, the spread is higher, the quantum, the wallet size, the amount that people can spend is much lower. And that actually creates different kinds of challenges to those who are trying to bring markets to this area, to bring about development. And I think, therefore, the transition that we are going through, the idea that, for example, when you actually look at rural India, what do you produce in rural India? Generally, we try to sell into rural India, but it's a very important thing to actually buy from rural India. So farmers produce something, and then there are lots of new agri-tech enterprises have come in, which are trying to sell so that the farmer has a higher income. Now, for that, the farmer needs to produce what the urban elite wants to eat. And I'll give you an example of Soulful, a company that we actually worked with, where what are you transforming? So we know that millets is good for us. Venkat will tell you. It's something very important. We never used to eat wheat and rice, but now we eat wheat and rice, and millet is what our original food. But millet is good for environment also. It's good for soil, it's good for this thing. But how do you convince a poor person, farmer, a small-time farmer to grow millets, because there is no market for it? So you can do two ways. You can go and say, I'll give you free amount, I'll pay you something, etc., etc. Or you create an enterprise which converts the rich Indians as consumer of millets. And if you do so, you create a virtuous cycle of taking back something which is very difficult to do. I mean, taking people out of rice to actually millets is a difficult task. But if you can you can influence the palate of the rich, then you can do it, and you can then actually reward the farmer as well. Now, that's actually one intervention, but the same intervention if stretched to the challenges that we are faced with. Climate change is a huge challenge. Can you convert climate change, which is a huge challenge, into an opportunity for rural India? Now, that actually is really the opportunity. So when we go to very poor people and we ask them, we are giving you a loan, is that what you want? And invariably, I've asked this question to a lot of women, and they said, yes, we want the loan, we don't want to pay it back, and we don't want any interest on it. So can you give us that option? Give us the loan, but we will return it when we can, and not on a weekly basis, as you ask in microfinance. Now, that's a beautiful question. I want the money, I'll return it when I have it, not on a weekly basis as you want it, and I can't guarantee you a return. Unfortunately, that's not what we have designed. So is there something that we can do in climate change where we actually provide the woman what she wants, the farmer what he or she wants, the money goes in their pocket, they spend it the way they want, they create something which is good for the environment, and they never return the money. And that's really what innovation is about. And markets are actually preparing themselves to offer something like that. And that's what Avishkar is trying to do. How do you work on cutting edge of money, where money actually comes in but never goes out, and everybody is happy because the poor is happy, They take money, they don't return it. And the global markets is happy because the poor is doing something that actually creates value for them. And in the process, we address climate change. I'm also not giving the answer, but I'm just giving you a potential possibility that could actually solve this problem. And at Avishkar, we are trying to work on something as ridiculous as this, which I think probably has a solution for the world as was for India.
Wow, we'll certainly pick up on that later. Anand, over to you. You have come in as the CEA in this government a few months ago, and it will be lovely to hear you represent the government or yourself on what the panelists have said, but mostly what is the government hoping to do to achieve our sustainable development goals, mainly for equity and inclusion in rural India?
Thank you, Rohini, and very happy to be part of this panel. I haven't met Anurag before, but good to see him on the screen first. Hope to see him in person sometime soon. Vinny is an old friend. I haven't met Venkat also and Anirban before, so look forward to engaging with them in the months and days and months ahead. Now, with that remark, I think what came through, if I could sort of quickly recap what some of these gentlemen said. So Venkat talked about the aspiration of requiring quality healthcare at affordable prices, and I think Anurag spoke about the need to imagine creatively, keeping in mind the mistakes made in the last 100 years in terms of the path of growth that the world had chosen, and that it has to be rooted in the socio-cultural and humanistic background. And he also made an interesting proposition that equity leads quality, which in itself should be a topic for another session that I could recommend to Anirban. And Vineet said, when he asks the rural women about what they want, they said they give us a loan, don't ask for interest, and don't ask when we would repay. I'm not entirely sure then, therefore, when we talk of sustainability and rural India, that is a sustainable model at all. So if anything, maybe the first path of transformation must begin with teaching all people, whether it is urban institutional investor or an individual investor or a rural woman customer, that free lunches are not necessarily possible all the time. They can be possible sometime, but not all the time. Maybe that is where the first transformation exercise has to begin. Now, what the government is doing with respect to rural India, first, let me tell you some good news that next year is going to be the year of the millet. And it is also will be the G20 presidency will also be used as an opportunity to showcase that as the year of the millet. And while I'm probably speaking a little bit ahead of time, currently the thought in the government in terms of using the G20 presidency to talk about lifestyle changes, sustainable ways of living, in terms of simple habits. I mean, whether it is growing the less water intensive crop or using private modes of transport or wasting food on the plate, etc. These are all the ways in which the Prime Minister wants to carry the dialogue in G20 and not just always focus on Western institutions of carbon pricing and carbon border adjustment mechanisms, etc., because he thinks lifestyle changes as a means to bringing about or dealing with climate change should be India's messaging in the G20 presidency. So that is just information that is also in a way consistent with what we talk about, what rural India is capable of doing or what rural India has shown us as the path. Now, if you look at the options or the obligations on the part of the governments, and that is itself a vast subject to not just to rural India, but also to the whole of India. The government can be an enabler. It can create the infrastructure. It can create the connectivity. It should provide for healthcare and education, at least in the first few years of children's lives, maybe up to high school. But after that, the so-called market mechanism and the rest of the economy must do their bit as well. What has happened in the last 2 years or 2.5 years because of the pandemic is that many of these resources required to bring about doing these basic obligations has had to be diverted for immediate pandemic control and even take into consideration the changes in the security environment for the country in the last 2 years. Some of you might know since what happened in April 2020 across the border in the upper reaches of Himalayas and so on. So therefore, what is happening is that there is a genuine issue here. There is a resource constraint here that we are dealing with because much of it had to be diverted towards attending to the immediate emergency needs as well. But be that as it may, we have to take a step back and therefore are not focused very much about the current cyclical concerns that we have, that sort of improvements aren't happening as fast as we would like to see with respect to the rural employment, women labor force participation rate, etc. I don't want to go into the various schemes that the government has announced over the years with respect to affordable homes, or in terms of the skilling, and also in terms of rural electrification, etc., which all of us are aware of, and that is not the point here. If you look at the National Family Health Survey number 4, which was done in 2015-16, and compare it to the National Family Health Survey number 5, which was completed over a period of 3 years because of the pandemic, from 19 to 21. Now, population living in households with electricity, some form of electricity, went up from 83% to 96%, roughly. And then households with any usual member covered under a health insurance or a financing scheme went up from 28.9% to 42.4%. Institutional births went up from 75 to 87. Children under 5 years who were stunted, I think it is still high, but it came down from 41.2 to 37.3%. This is overall for the country, not just, this is only for rural areas. All women aged 15 to 49 years who were anemic, that actually went up from 54.3% to 58.5%. And women participating in household decisions such as deciding on healthcare for herself, making household purchases, visiting her family or relatives, they're able to participate in these decisions. That participation rate went up from 83% to 87.7%. And of course, women having bank accounts, we know that that was a big success story over the last 6-7 years. And also women getting married before the age of 18, that percentage came down from 31.5 to 27. So what we see here is that there is a stock of challenges and there is a flow, the incremental change. The incremental change in most parameters is in the right direction. And there are, but even then the stock of the problem still remains substantial, which means more resources and more efforts to be plowed into these issues. And in some cases, there's even a regression in terms of stunting, etc. So what is it that we can do sitting in so-called urban India talking about these things is to provide the resources to the government, i.e. in terms of widening the tax to GDP ratio, increasing compliance, and also making sure that we not only ask what the government ought to be doing, holding it accountable, which by all means we should do, but also think in terms of what we can do to make sure that we provide the resources and the support to the population and the public. Certainly, it can't be saying that to the rural women, you can have your loan, you don't have to repay, and you don't have to pay any interest. I don't think that's the answer. That is unsustainable. Back to you.
Thank you. I think we'll just allow Vinny to clarify. I'm not quite sure he was talking about giving away freebies. I think he was talking about a different form of value creation. So let's, Vinny, quickly clarify what you meant. You're not planning to spend all our money giving people loans and saying, don't worry about returning them. What exactly is the imagination? Can you describe it briefly, please?
Yeah, I think Anand knows me long enough to know that I'm not advocating freebies.
I
think if I created that impression, the idea is not that. I think what we need to ask ourselves is, what does the customer want? And customer want access to reasonable priced capital and also flexibility. That's what we all want. Not necessarily not to return it, but if you can make it happen. So if the customer takes a loan and does something that allows me to actually create an arbitrage, where somebody else is actually willing to pay for the value that has been created. And a very simple thing, if a customer takes a loan, uses that loan to meet their own needs and actually grows a tree, for example, grows a tree. Now, if you grow a tree, that tree is actually going to convert, it's going to sequester carbon. that sequestration of carbon actually has a voluntary market, given the climate change issues that's coming through. And if I can actually commit that lady that she will not only grow that tree, she will look after it, she will have access to that timber, and I can generate a return by the sequestration that is taking place for me to generate the returns that I could have if the woman returns the money. Then I think I've created a product that allows the women's labor to actually be valued significantly highly than the way we are valuing it. And unless we as capital market guys do not use this expertise to create value, the question about equity will never get addressed, because physical labor will only deliver you that kind of return. And so I think countries like India must therefore, given the kind of expertise that we have gained in terms of financial capabilities in all kinds of structuring, invariably, if you look at a very large enterprise, their tax levels are going to be the lowest in the world. So the invariable question that always comes is, why is the microfinance loan the most expensive? Because the poor should not actually be paying. We have always justified it by saying velocity of money, quantum of capital is too small, so the interest, I mean, I have justified it all my life. But I think time has come for us to challenge and question the justification. And also, when big guys are actually taking a lot of advantages, how can we use our capital capabilities to create value for them? This is not to make them unaccountable. It is actually to reduce the pressure on them so that they can actually start competing for the equity that is missing.
Thank you, Vineet. I've seen a lot of innovation in the financial inclusion sector over the last few years, and we always need more innovation. I mean, in some sense, PES, right, was tried out also. How do you, I mean, this question needs to stay on this table and many experiments need to be done. How do you create continuous regeneration of the ecology? And how do you create different forms of market value for it as well? Not only, but as well. And you brought in one part of that. So I hope Anant is clarified that, in fact, as we all know, for the most part, the poor, even when they get microloans at very high interest rates, have consistently shown over 40 years that their repayment rates, I'm sorry to say, are higher than many of the corporate people whose loans have resulted in bad banks having to be set up. So in that sense, that experiment has been a huge success, and more innovation can come on the back of some of those lessons. But let me just, so in the sense, we are trying to ask, what do people want, right? What products are we going to create? What social movements are we going to create that are closest to the heart of the people? I want to ask this panel, in 2022, and especially post-pandemic, when so many people went back home, right? And not all of them have returned. Do you think there is a new push and pull that has been created? That we all used to say, yes, everyone from the rural areas wants to come to urban, right? But do you think the reality has changed, that some people are beginning to perhaps understand that the poor person's urban experience may not be the best, and perhaps good air, clean water, community, new opportunities created by a very by the state, like DBT and other things which have made rural life a little better? Do you think, and I would like all the panel to respond to this, do you think there are new pushes and pulls, not just one way, but both ways? Anybody? Anurag first.
Yeah, Rohini, I don't know whether there are new pushes and pulls. That I don't know. But perhaps there's a new realization, right? Which is in big part what you said, which is very accurate. That, if I live in some village outside Mau, outside, some distance from Varanasi, ye theek hai, yahi reh jaunga, right? What is it that I'm doing in Bangalore? So I think that is, it sounds very oversimplified, but I think that's a significant thing that I see on the ground. And at the same time, it's not as though, the kind of sectors that these people are working in have fully bounced back from an economic perspective, right? So I don't think it's a new thing, but it's a new realization.
Right. Anant, would you respond to this next Do we see this? And tying into your point that the Prime Minister is talking about, how do we rethink what a good life is?
No, absolutely. I think that is needed because, I mean, anyway, but just to clarify, I was just using Vinny's remarks, whom I know for the last 20 years plus, to make the point that, and which you also kind of alluded to when you said, private corporate sector has been more delinquent than the rural borrowers. And that point is very well made, which basically boils down to the issue of accountability. So I was just trying to drive home the point that across government, across the private sector, rural or urban India, accountability has to be one of the building blocks of bringing about transformation. That was one. The point is, I think we should go back to what both Venkat and Vineet said. The aspiration and the affordability are the same kind of things between rural urban India, but Vineet made a very perceptive observation that the gap between the two is much greater in rural India than in urban India, even though the gap exists in both the places. And therefore, what is it that we can do to reduce that gap? Naturally, it boils down to the question of boosting their incomes. And also the question that you are asking, that's the pull and pressure. The aspirations of rural India stem from what they see is happening in rural India. So they want to emulate the same consumption habits, lifestyles, and want to own the same kind of vehicles, consumer durables, etc. And I mean, you can't say, this is exactly what we are saying to the West. You guys have had it, and then now you say it's unsustainable. Therefore, you guys should stop acquiring them. That's what the West is selling the East. Now urban India can't tell the same thing to rural India. What we are doing is unsustainable, so please don't do that. Then in that case, you have to set an example. We have to set an example. And the example comes at each one of our personal levels and the institution. What is it that we can do? And that is why I feel urban India has to start first, as you correctly put it, Rohini, in your remarks, that the private corporate sector, for example, can begin by paying micro, small, and medium enterprises. Many of them are located in rural India on time. I mean, you look at, for example, the new systems of trade receivables exchanges set up in the country, whether it is RXIL, etc. Many companies onboard themselves, but very few actually utilize them to pay their suppliers. So I think while the problem is too big and the efforts have to be therefore over a multi-decade, and these transformations don't happen so quickly, it is important that each one of us reduce the problem to the level of what is the action that I can take in my sphere of activity and do that. And that means increasing the opportunities for employment and at the same time making sure that the aspiration that they are looking for is also consistent with sustainability, which means urban India has to set the example. Otherwise, the gap between the aspiration and the affordability will remain very high, and that will lead to social frustrations and instability, etc. Back to you.
No, but I do want to push you a bit on this, because in the government's perception, do you think that there will still be a large core, say of the next, now we are luckily and wonderful celebrations beginning for our 75th Independence Day, but say looking 25 years out, right? How much does the government expect of the rural population to stay in sort of rural, peri-urban? And this whole talk of, say, increasing value and productivity, right, through things such as like food corridors, etc. Can you talk a bit about the vision of the agrarian economy for the, say, I know 25 years is a long time, but anything you can tell us which will again feed back into TRI's work?
I'll take a stab at it. I mean, if you look at the transformation that countries across the world have achieved, it is natural that the share of agriculture becomes smaller and smaller as countries develop, because you still only eat 2 or 3 meals a day. So it is not that as economies rise in prosperity and in size, agriculture also grows commensurately. That doesn't happen. It has to be the case that therefore appropriate industries do get located in rural India. It is not as if rural India has to migrate and the share of urban population has to increase. It can well be the case that rural India gets well connected, in which case they can still be called rural or semi-urban or whatever, but still be plugged into the overall economy. And that is what the government is focusing on. So I don't think we should be looking at migration to urban India as a sign of progress. If anything, that's a sign of lack of progress. And we need to create the enabling infrastructure, and that includes not just internet connectivity, broadband, or roads, but also education and health opportunities in the rural India, such that an urban person wanting to relocate for better or cleaner air and peaceful life, etc., should be able to get at least the basic minimum. In fact, we should be looking at reverse migration to the extent possible, not just of.
Now you're talking Anirban's language.
Yeah. Rural, it's not a question of making sure that the rural people who came back to their villages during the pandemic go back to urban India. That is not a sign of progress. If we can actually also help make our cities livable by making our successful urban dwellers seek opportunities and create opportunities in rural India, that would be the exact win-win approach that we should be pursuing.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Anurag. First, let me ask Anand. No, sorry, not Anand, Venkat. Anurag is challenging us, saying that it's not a technocratic vision, but a humanistic vision, right? But I do want you, Venkat, to talk about the possibilities of a technocratic or at least technology-enabled vision, where actually what Anand is saying may come true, that everybody doesn't need to move into urban areas, but because of various things that technology enables, where with Avanti you are doing microloans, there are so many ways. What Vinit is talking about, how do you increase productivity and markets so that people who are creating produce, etc., may be able to live better off where they are living and yet go up the value chain and the lifestyle chain without being unsustainable. So actually, what is the positive role of technology here? And Vinit, you can kick in after that.
Thanks, Ronnie. 2 or 3 things out here. One, we need to acknowledge and realize that this is as much a behavioral science issue which is intergenerational rather than a conventional technology or a financial issue or a healthcare issue alone. That's one. Second, in order to achieve equity, we must have humility in terms of there are many unknown unknowns in this world, both as individuals as well as some of the recent images of the James Webb Telescope indicate to us how stupid or how unknown we are when we compare ourselves at a cosmic or an intergalactic level. We might have our own notions of who we are in this world. In Delhi, Anand will tell you, first thing they start off, do you know who I am? Because I don't know who you are. How do I know what you do or where you come from? When we start with that degree of humility in embracing that we are part of a much wider cosmos, each one of us would start believing and attempting to make a difference, first starting with things in and around in our wider circle and within the much larger ecosystem in wanting or attempting to make a difference to the quality of lives of people. That is one. Second, we also would need to recognize as and when people's migration has been a perennial process since 20,000 odd years. We cannot change it overnight and expect probably people like Sridhar Vembu are very rare when they go back in town and try to do X, Y, Z. But if you ask, again, sorry to make a very provocative question, you can't ask the government of India to be run from Vadnagar today. So the PM might go, none of the civil servants will go anywhere close to Vadnagar. Let's acknowledge that reality that whether critical infrastructure, both on healthcare or education, will all be remaining in the top 5 or 6 cities for the foreseeable future. That's the second bit. Third bit, at the same time, if we start unbundling the various pieces of the knowledge ecosystem in a tiered hierarchy of a hub and spoke and a further spoke, by virtue of today, you have an air traffic controller. He can be literally anywhere in the world, but still can navigate an airline for 90% of things. Education, many of the tech players, we might have our own biases of using technology, but you can get access to a professor of Stanford in a Coursera type of equivalent and get the basics of it. Why may you not get the dignity or the empathy that we get in a campus, but the content part of it can be done seamlessly, but the Gurukul aspect of a physical engagement would still need to be there. That's the second bit. Third bit is much of it is also contextual. I fully agree with what Anurag mentioned. India is by definition in the constitution a union of states. If we try to push to a unitary process, many years ago I was visiting Manipur. The first thing is a tribal affiliation. I'm a Maitai. The states are more by a geographical boundary of an administrative process, but not an individual identity yet. And we would take time, if not generations, trying to slot many things as, Anand, this, again, I don't know whether I can say, as one size fits all 60-40 for literally every state other than Northeast as a scheme, just won't fly. And you will find more and more revulsion and or repulsion, as the case might be. Can we truly empower the letter and spirit of a Panchayat Raj in a hyper-local environment, which people sort out what their own needs are at that particular locational context? And to do that would need humility at all levels, means at a local acknowledgement that, look, this is what only I can do, beyond which I need to go to a separate town, beyond which I need to go to a separate town, beyond which I need to go to a separate town. Last but not the least, I think Vineet is not far off in indicating, while it's not free per se in the text of free, but if we look at some of the global tech majors or players, they all, when they grow as big as what they are today, they have never grown by a linear or a quadratic functionality. They've grown at an exponential personality. So what today is our crisis as far as climate change or rural is concerned, we could turn that on its head and make it as a phenomenal opportunity. Because when I take healthcare as an example, like say, just give a 2014 to now example of a drug called pembrolizumab. The brand name of it is Keytruda, which in the initial days when it was funded or founded by Merck, had a annual sales of 55 million. Just one drug this year was 22 billion. One single drug, or it's given for, started off with advanced non-small non-skin cancer, now used for a range of other cancer. If you look at the extent of sample size of people when they went through those global clinical trials for what it is or what not, it was done on a sample size of 249 people. None of them were from Asia, leave alone India. So we are copying or aping what comes from West and making it applicable here. If you walk into Tata Memorial Hospital today, you will find 300 such cases on one single day. You can really run many of those things as a real world evidence, which is relevant to an Indian context, and that too in a much more hyper-local context. The anemia numbers of East or Northeast will be very different from Kerala. Having a standard package of this is your iron folic acid for all across the country may not be that relevant as we want to make a difference as per NFHS reports that you see. So how do you give that discretion without compromising on the quality? Thereby, if you start giving too much discretion, you might not get scalability as well. These are interesting conundrums for an economist to constantly deal with, trying to, and then doing a multivariate analysis of all of this and see which one works or doesn't work.
Thank you. Thank you, Venkat. Now, because Vineet and Anand have to leave a little early, I'm going to give them the next 10 minutes. And if any of my other panelists want to ask them questions, please come in. Vineet, come in on some of the things that have been spoken up till now, and anything you want to add. And then I'm going to ask Anand to tell us a little more about answering one or two of the questions that have come. Audience, if you want to ask Vineet and Anand a specific, very clearly written question, please do so. Yeah, go ahead, Vineet.
Since we are talking about opportunities, reverse migration, etc., and of course, pandemic led to a lot of people going back, I'll just try to say I come from Eastern UP. I come from Varanasi and Ghazipur, and I have been actually spending a significant amount of time thinking from the perspective of the work that I have done. So the impact investing, creating enterprises in rural India, in UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha. How do you inspire entrepreneurs, etc. But I was generally trying to inspire one entrepreneur in an isolated location, broken ecosystem, providing significant capital and support to create an enterprise that can create significant employment, etc. What I realized after spending a significant amount of time in my area in Eastern UP, that while I created by our capital investment, by supporting an entrepreneur, a very large bank called Utkarsh Bank, which is located headquartered in Varanasi and operates all across India, 10,000 crores from zeros to 10,000 crores in less than 12 years, 6,000, 7,000 people employed in rural India. But it was not enough to make any difference, real difference to Eastern UP. Eastern UP will roughly have 8 crore people. So really, what have you done despite all 12 years? So the more time I spent, I realized there are 3-4 interesting learnings that are coming out. One, my learning was as a forester that ecosystems are very critical for success to happen, for capital to be deployed. And ecosystem mean you have to go beyond just looking at capital and entrepreneur and look at every other thing. Now, Government of India in Eastern UP has just built beautiful highways. So there's a lot of progress, at least from an infrastructure perspective, that has happened. Now, if you can overlay this progress with some kind of intervention where you can, those who have come back with some skills, for example, let's say a plumber has come back to Varanasi and all. Now, how do you actually convert that person into a job creator for that area? What kind of intervention do you need? And how do you provide that capital that is needed? Now, I thought about impact investing and I realized the model is flawed for bringing about a significant change. I need to create 20,000, 50,000 entrepreneurs in that 8 crore market to actually make any real difference. And the kind of investment that we do using venture capital model in impact investing is not really conducive to that kind of investment. I generally want to diversify my risk by going all over the geography. Concentrating risk is not good. So then I actually turned back to using an philanthropic approach to crowdsourcing capital. We raised a foundation. We will raise it. And what we will do is actually go to the schools and try to inculcate in the government schools a desire to actually think about a business as an option. So today you go to Eastern UP, you will largely have either people want to be an IAS, IPS or a peon, but not necessarily an entrepreneur. So how do you do some business plan competitions, etc.? That's one stage. Second, there are a large number of people who are unemployed. How do you actually convince them to think about learning something about starting a business? It's not that they are not doing it, they are doing it, but they are doing it without any real understanding of what you do. The third thing, which is very critical and something that I felt in Eastern UP is missing, is the ethics of business. So if you go and buy curd, dahi, wahan pe, so you will actually get a very thick malai on it. Now, whether that malai is tissue paper or real malai, there is no clue. I have no idea. How do you actually inculcate the ethics of not taking people for a ride, doing these bad things, and build businesses for the ethics of building a good thing and not really trying to make money by cutting the stomach of the golden egg laying goose? So I think it's a very important thing that ecosystem should actually educate people. And education per se is not going to bring you ethics. And therefore you need to do that. And ultimately you provide capital to people, 1 lakh, 2 lakh, 5 lakh, 10 lakh, in a manner knowing fully well that 80% might still fail. But you have to create thousands of entrepreneurs. 800 may fail, but 200, those who succeed, will become role models for tens of thousands of other kids to actually think about building a business. If it is done in a very concentrated manner in Eastern UP, we might actually be able to create this what you call entrepreneurial opportunity that actually creates some level of equity and some level of prosperity in a region which is considered pretty much as backward as sub-Saharan Africa. So I think when we look at the kind of capital, the amount of risk that you're willing to take, the kind of ecosystem that you build, and the ability of the entrepreneur to think beyond themselves as the benefactor of the society is very critical. Unfortunately, it's missing even in the large entrepreneurs in our society, but it is equally bad at the lower side. I'm actually a great believer that poor and rich actually are equally stingy when their heart is, and a lot of people actually disagree with me on that. They think poor have larger heart. It's just because they are in a communal setup. So you need to have a larger heart, but given an opportunity, if they become rich, they have their heart become of the same size as the rich in general. So we have to just keep away this segregation, interfere to make sure that we are building this ecosystem, which will allow that reverse migration to happen, because opportunity is where the pyramid is really the most complex. And I think these kind of intervention, if done on a concentrated basis, can make a huge difference.
Thank you, Vineet. Since you have to leave soon, and Anant, you as well, over to you for the next 3-4 minutes to respond to Vineet. And to a question which I think Anish has also asked, what more does the state need to do? What can the state do, right, to enable this rural transformation so that not everybody necessarily comes into urban areas, but still their quality of life and opportunity goes up?
Yeah, I mean, see, I'll try, since the So since the overall theme is about transformation, let me try to stick to that theme. I think Mark Twain once said that all my best ideas were stolen by my ancestors, and I must say all my best ideas were stolen by Venkat, because he said everything I wanted to say. He spoke about humility. He spoke about the need for businesses to emulate what Sridhar Vembu is trying to do sitting in Tenkasi. And also he spoke about Panchayat Raj and devolution. How many states have appointed their own finance commissions, which they have to do as per constitution, and then transfer powers to the Panchayat Raj institutions. So there is a devolution of responsibility, but there's no devolution of authority as well as resources. But even if that happens, we all have to be very clear. Let's say there are one or two states that do this. But we shouldn't be looking for results, and we shouldn't be impatient, because it's one thing to give the Panchayat institutions authority and resources, but they may not have the capacity yet to be able to deliver on them. So we need to be patient. We need to understand that many of these things require time to fructify in terms of results. So that is something that we as critics, or we as so-called experts and elites have to be aware of. And then, as Venkat said, how many people are willing to actually walk their talk, as Sridhar Vembu is doing, in terms of picking up talent from rural India, training them and giving them the opportunity to grow? He could be doing it in software, but there could be many other businesses we should try. That is the best way to use the skilling and vocational training that the government is giving through PM Kaushal Yojana, etc., and putting that into action and seeing that. I think that is the second thing we need to do. And the third thing I would say is, one of the questions, what should the government continue to do? I think the government should continue to do what it is doing in terms of making sure that the rural India is connected in all possible ways, and at least the basic healthcare and education, functioning schools, functioning toilets in schools, functioning water taps in schools, and healthcare, they need to be provided. Lastly, I would say what the government can and should do much more easily without depending on others, and it doesn't require resources, it requires mindset that maybe is more difficult. And it is not just the union government, but governments at all levels, is to reduce what I call the LIC Raj, license, inspection and compliance Raj. The amount of bandwidth that the rural business person or a woman or a man has to meet with government compliances and inspections, and the amount of money they spend as a proportion of the resources they have, is humongous. And they don't have human resources as well. They are the one-person show in many cases. If you look at the data on periodic labor force survey, self-employment has gone up a lot in rural India, and that is sometimes a proxy for disguised unemployment, actually. Yes. So in that sense, the LIC Raj at all levels of governments has to come down. These are all the ways in which governments can contribute to the rural transformation, but the private sector also has to walk its talk in terms of experimenting, because both policy decisions and business decisions have to be also seen as entrepreneurial in nature. Some will succeed, some will fail, but we have to keep trying. And we should also remember that because of the technological developments we have, the information that we have at our disposal, our aspirations have grown much, much faster than what transformation normally takes to achieve. In other words, we need to keep a temporal perspectives also. Thank you.
I can't let you go, Anant, without just saying anything about the participation of women in the labor force. Is it that the economy is not creating the kind of jobs and the kind of conditions of work that women can happily participate in? Because it's not like they don't want to work. Many want to work. Maybe there's some elite that doesn't want to do anything at all. But a lot of people want to have dignified livelihoods and get economic independence, right? Lot of women, millions and millions of women. Is there something the state could do differently? Is there something the markets can do differently so that we create jobs that women want?
No, I think
not just jobs, livelihoods.
No, that's again an important topic, and I think we need to discuss it more thoroughly. First thing is we need to understand that there has to be a uniform standardized measurement of female labor force participation rate across countries. When we are told that our neighbors have much higher WLFPR, we need to be sure that they and us are measuring it in the same way. So that is very first thing. And second, we have lost a lot of labor force participation rate on the part of women in the last 2 years after the pandemic. So whatever percentage we had, no matter how low or high it was, that has come down. To some extent, I still believe that much of it would be reversible and would be reversed given time, because barely had the pandemic subsided, we have the new uncertainties there. So we probably need to keep that in mind. Some of it is reversible. And the third, some of the changes that are happening with the what the pandemic has done is to also give women also choice to choose the kind of work they do. Some of the people have turned into gig workers so that they choose the time they want to be employed, so that they can also devote time to their family responsibilities. So are we really counting them all? But beyond all this, statistical as well as time to be given, what the state can and should continue to do is to ensure that workplace discrimination is minimized and eliminated. There is safety and security in terms of law and order, both inside offices or inside establishments in general and outside as well. And thirdly, continue to ensure, which already is happening to a large extent, women are able to continue to upskill themselves, upgrade themselves, and also make sure that there is no active workplace discrimination in terms of their ability to take time off from work, both during childbirth and during later years, etc. So all that the state can and should continue to ensure is that there is a level playing field. And if anything, whatever impediments that the state can remove, it must continue to remove. Beyond that point, I think the much of the economic activity, once it improves post the pandemic and post the conflict, will probably, in my opinion, bring back the labor force participation rate that we had earlier. And also we should make sure that we understand the definition of being employed, and it is common across countries for us to be able to make meaningful comparisons. Back to you.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you for your time. The struggle continues. And we need one last word before you leave.
Yeah, I think there's a question actually, which I thought I should just address.
Please, go ahead.
On the education and how it can actually be done. I actually don't have an answer. I'm not an educationist, but given my ambition is, if we are able to run this experiment in Eastern UP, I want to actually set up a university of mass entrepreneurship. I'm not talking about mass skilling, I'm talking about mass entrepreneurship. And this is actually about helping people to think about how to become an entrepreneur and creating opportunities and an ecosystem around it. But for that, I need to actually experience this experiment that we are going to do over the next 2-3 years should showcase what is it that it takes to make, to convince people that entrepreneurship is potentially a good option. For that, you need to actually create the conducive environment in a reasonably challenging environment of Eastern UP. So if I'm able to do it, and if we are successful, then potentially a university that could actually provide virtual incubation, virtual mentoring, virtual support, virtual business plan, etc. That's how we want to address it. I don't have a ready-made answer. I know there are a lot of entrepreneurship institutes all across the world. So there's a lot of learning that has to go, but without an ecosystem, any amount of entrepreneurship teaching may not deliver the results that we aspire to have. So.
Thank you. We look forward to hearing more about your experimentation. I think it's useful to TRIF as well. Thank you, Vineet, and well, goodbye, since you have another appointment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anurag, thank you so much, Anurag and Venkat, for your patience, especially Anurag. Anurag, please chip in and say whatever from your impressions of what's been going on, and then, of course, Venkat. We have a few minutes.
Yeah, so many things, Perhaps I can start off from where Vineet left off. I think, we don't need to have one, we know that no one solution, one approach is going to work. So we have to try everything, right? We have to try everything that sounds reasonable, seems logical. What I wanted to point out, as much as endorsing the idea of the entrepreneurship university and the other things, is that this kind of efforts, which are worthy in themselves, must not distract us from the basics. Entrepreneurship university is no substitute for good sound education. And good sound education actually is when it also develops ethics. So I'm using that as a case in point, so which is we must do everything, but that does not mean that we must get distracted from the basics. We must get the basics right. I was glad to hear Anant talk about the state responsibility of, school education and health, because I think that's the basics. So I think that's one thing that I wanted to sort of respond to actually, and I feel that too often we have these wonderful ideas which are all worth pursuing, but they do tend to distract us from the very basics, right? And eventually, because it's not just a question of money, it's a question of our attention spans, really, right? So I think that's one. The other one was that, I feel in a sense, I'm going back to my the beginning tune that I started with, which is that I feel it's important to
We'll wait a second or two.
But can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay. So I was saying that I think it's important to acknowledge. That we don't know what to do. We know pieces. We know, we have hypotheses here and there, but the grand challenge that is in front of us to say that more than half our people still live off the land. How are they going to get transformed, right? With the whole matter that we were discussing on livelihoods, equity, climate change, women's aspirations. We don't know the grand solution. And there is no grand solution. But I think an acknowledgement of our lack of understanding and knowledge will get us a long way. We shouldn't have these glib, and in this panel, nobody had glib answers, but we shouldn't have these glib answers to ourselves. Oh, let's do this and we'll get transformed, right? So I think that acknowledgement is very important, very, very, very important.
Venkat, do you want to respond to that? I also do want you both to come to the real challenge of climate change. And in rural India, first of all, climate change is already here. We're not even talking about what's happening in Assam as we speak, or many other parts of the country. The monsoon is always a period of extreme devastation for many, many people in North India and increasingly around the coasts of India as well. We are not talking enough about climate change is already here. Now, there is stuff happening at the macro level in terms of mitigation. We are talking about hydrogen economies, whatever that is. But at the level of rural people's lives, we talk about adaptation, we talk about resilience. Any thoughts on this, Venkat? And again, Anurag too.
Two or three things, Rohini. One, either in the private or in the public sector, we need to get, as Anurag rightly mentioned, the basics right. It is not about governments, it's about governance. And we need to really think through on many of these things. Are they too much proprietary, or they are really participatory? At times, democracy exists, but end of the day, when you look at a sarkar, there are only three parts of a democracy: PM, CM, and DM. Any of the people in rest of the governance mechanisms, theoretically, if you want to get anything done, really doesn't matter unless you have the blessings of either of these three on your hand or head, as the case might be. That's one. Second, coming to specific issues of climate as well as in the floodplain regions, our colleague Dr. Sanjeev Phansalkar, after several months of study, came out with what is or could be a mitigation plan for flood-prone regions, because Bihar, Assam, several parts of the Gangetic and Brahmaputra belt, every year this is a perennial problem.
Yeah,
this has been there from time immemorial. It is not as if this has appeared or happened today. We have probably not understood the landscape of people's life and livelihood historically dependent upon the river and the changes that it used to make historically. We have urbanized in and around without much of relevance to how those, whatever you call on the navigation pathways of water to flow, because we might have our own boundaries of what you call stormwater drainage or XYZ. Nature doesn't follow any such boundary. It follows nature. What exists in one form or the other. We have
no, but Venkat, that's where the rubber hits the road, right?
Exactly, as
the land use issue. People want to use whatever land they can, and the river needs its land. It needs its floodplains, but people want to do agriculture on the floodplains, want to live there. They want tourism to come in there. How do you resolve some of these very large things? Do we respect the need of the river? Because eventually, see, that's a very long-term thing. No, how do you do the trade-offs between the short and long term?
See, in this, there are certain basics which, if we just acknowledge with some humility, these are basics, we can rarely go wrong. Suppose if you take the Assam floodplains, the people who have been working on those floodplains for generations, they cultivate when the waters recede, because it gives a huge extent of things, and then go back to their other activity or action and leave the river when the things come in a natural progression. But if we miss that and try to say, look, I'll build a highway, I will build a massive urban settlement, I will encroach for 1, 2, 3 reasons, nature doesn't respect those boundaries, whereas people's life and livelihood happens to be in that way. This is also unique. Even recently, I happened to go to Jim Corbett National Park. The tribals living inside deep understand, look, this is the monsoon or the mating season. Despite whatever pressures be on tourism, please shut this down. Don't come. Though you might get a good view of what the nature might say or not say, don't disturb it. Let it live the way it wants to live and move back. But if we try to too much urbanize for our own interest of taking a great snap and posting on Instagram, which gives a kick for number of likes at that particular instance, we are distorting the balance, so to speak. Again, I go back to the question of humility in acknowledging who really we are. In front of nature, we are really nothing. From time immemorial, the extinction of dinosaurs, who were much more powerful than many empires or people around, vanished with one single act of nature. So I think trying to respect what we have, whether it is water, land, or any of the environment in and around, with some degree of humility is, in my view, the starting point of engaging or embracing with many of those things that are around us.
But then it is going to go back again to questions of what is development. And I don't see how you can avoid those questions. We want prosperity for all, but we only know how to measure prosperity in a certain model of development. And we know very well, as Anurag said in the beginning, that that model of development has led us to the point where now we are going to have climate refugees everywhere. So how, again, maybe Anurag has some thoughts, because he does talk to people all the time. Surely they are cognizant of this. I mean, forget what the politicians say, forget what the urban rich do. When you come and talk to people who are living in areas where they are actually experiencing climate change now, what do you see as the potential? What do you see as the change in people's understanding over just the last, say, decade, just one decade? Anything, Anurag?
So, Rohini, I'll respond to that very specific question. Then I have 3 other things about this whole climate change matter. So, see, I think mostly people don't understand.
Okay.
And that's the problem.
They don't understand, climate change issues, you mean? Okay.
Yeah, they don't understand climate change issues. They might be saying कि अभी थोड़ा ज़्यादा सूखा पड़ने लगा है या बारिश होने लगी. It's a phenomena that we are all familiar with, right? That the effect of slow changes is very hard, very grasped. Slow from a human lifetime perspective. Slow changes is very hard to grasp. So I don't think that people have a significant consciousness of climate change issues. They will say कि हाँ थोड़ी ज़्यादा problem हो गई है पिछले 4-5 साल में. That's the kind of stuff. So the 3 points I have, these are specific things, which is one, I think that we need to do a lot more granular research on all aspects about how India is ground zero for climate change.
Yeah.
I don't think we understand that.
No.
It requires a huge amount of research at a very granular, detailed level. All aspects, how our coastal areas are going to get flooded, what's the effect in urban environments on our coastal livelihoods, rainfall change patterns across small geographies. So we need a very deep and comprehensive research, which will actually
Anurag,
tell us.
I'm going to provoke you. As a manager of India's largest philanthropy, do you think this this research can be somewhat philanthropically supported, because I agree with you on the need for this fundamental research.
So Rohini, we'll come out with India at the climate abyss very soon. So we're doing it. And it's not just our research, a lot of people are doing it with us.
All right, thank you.
So so I think that research is very important. Second, and please bear with my words, second is, I think we should use this research to scare the hell out of everybody. And scare the hell out of everybody, I don't mean the farmers or the kind of people we're talking about in rural India, people like you and me. I think we're just living in a dream world. We are not conscious what is going to happen to our country, not 50 years later, in 10 years' time. The heat traps you. So I think it's I'm putting it in a certain way. I think it's a huge mass public mobilization campaign exercise on how real this thing is in the here and now for us. So research, scare the hell out of people like us. And lastly, focus intensely and granularly on those livelihoods that are most vulnerable, and have a clear and specific plan for adaptation over the next 10, 15 years. Other stuff, of course, we should be doing, but getting a adaptation plan for all vulnerable livelihoods is, I think, critical. Yeah.
So now do you want to answer? There's a general question, but it's addressed to you. Do you want to try and answer that? Anurag, question to Mr. Bihar. You talked about ensuring basics in place, education, health, basic. We have seen government attempting and failing at these. How can government, market, and community ensure that such basics are delivered? You want to take a stab at that before I go back to Venkat?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can have a couple of hours or 2 days of conversation on that specific question. I think there is no substitute to strengthening the public education and the public health system at the level that we're talking about. So I think that's one. I think, in my view, the government of India has come up with a really comprehensive, far-reaching national education policy, NEP 2020. Its implementation has sort of started. If we do a good job of it, it will be really transformative. But I feel that there is no substitute to the fundamental matter of public systems being improved and strengthened on these two matters.
Anurag, to your point, we have 10 minutes left and I want to close exactly on time. Anirban, I'll give you the last few minutes, but Anurag, you said we should scare the living daylights of people like you and me. My question to you is, do people act better out of fear or hope? Like, I've seen people, especially the elite, they have already seceded from most things, and that includes me. We've seceded from all the public systems. We live in gated communities, all that thing. If we get frightened by these, maybe the hordes of people who are going to suffer, will the elite actually withdraw and say, abhi hum kya kar sakte hain? Or do you think they'll be inspired by hope to say, if we don't do this together, can enlightened self-interest kick in?
Anurag, let me take that first before you come in.
Yeah, please do that. Please do that. Sorry, Venkat, please.
Rohini, unfortunately, negative motivations work much better than positive motivations. I don't want to name an edtech company. Recently, it's well known and well articulated everywhere.
Yeah.
The way they do sales is ask a question for a second standard kid, a sixth standard question, and say, look, your child will fail because he has not taken this XYZ package. Because of the fear of a person not getting or being competitive in and around that cohort, sells easily. If you go and tell that, look, this is good for you, very rarely XYZ has happened or not happened across. This is, I'm mentioning.
No, but how will that work in this instance? Frightening the elite, how will that work according to you?
Say, like, if you take a climate example.
Sorry?
If you take a climate example, if you don't do 1, 2, 3, my reports or analysis regarding Chennai will get flooded in the next 24 months. It will scare the hell out of everybody to come up with at least talking and having a detailed conversation or challenging those assumptions or saying this is good or this is not bad in terms of trying and getting an action and or an aspiration. This is the sad part, which is true, which happens in even in the healthcare space that we are in. If you go and tell that, look, this is a good wellness thing, it's nice for you, do it, nobody even really cares. They'll say, boss, ye nahi kiya to cancer se 2 saal mein marne wala hai. Then the suddenly guys keep thinking, saying, look, boss, there is some problem with me. I need to do something. Let me go rush and check it out, whether it works or not. That's a behavioral
So
change.
the internalization of a crisis or an emergency creates the opportunity for change.
Absolutely.
And innovation.
Absolutely.
Okay. Back to you, Anurag. We have very few minutes left.
Yes, totally agree with Venkat.
Okay.
You got to do both together, which is scare the living daylights out of them and then give them hope.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anirban, do you want to come in now on if you have any questions for the remaining 50% of the panel?
I have a question for you, Ronnie. You've taken in fact, a very interesting seat. Ideally, I would have liked to hear from you on this specific subject and granular thoughts, because you've been in this space for long, been an entrepreneur as well as in development space for quite some time. We'll anyway read your book. I'm not saying that's a substitute for not reading a book, but as far as some of the questions that have been raised and attempting to answer, how would you respond?
So it's really not my call to do this, but I would say I have begun to believe that as Samaj, we need to do more. To first of all, to see ourselves more as Samaj and to see in ourselves the agency to do more. That the bazaar is there, the sarkar is there. Both have been created so that Samaj can do better, right? So how do we here in Samaj make sure that the bazaar and the sarkar are more accountable to the larger public interest? You can't do that by sleeping. You can't do that by expecting governance to happen on its own. You cannot just be a consumer of these wonderful things which allow instant things to happen and come to you without understanding that there are also negative externalities that the market creates which land up on your head as a citizen. Similarly with Sarkar, yes, Sarkar can do this much, but it can't do everything. So what is Samaj given up in the hope that the state will do everything? And what do we need to take back? I think we need, in the modern democracy, modern nation state, we need to reimagine the idea of what true citizenship means. Doesn't matter if you live in a city or a rural area. I think the role of Samaj and the institutions of Samaj as well, and there are so many kinds, quasi-religious, institutions such as think tanks or civil society organizations, just reimagining the role to take back more agency to solve problems, especially at a hyper-local level. We don't have much choice. We are not simply consumers of a market. We are not simply subjects of a state. And given the kind of complex problems there are, we know very well that Samaj will have to work with Bazaar and Sarkar. So how are we going to reduce the friction to collaborate? All the things we talked about today require the reduction of friction and the reduction of the deficit of trust. So I am interested in some of those issues as they play out in our very diverse and complex society, where at the young age of 75, we still have 600 million people possibly to bring back into the fold to have a more dignified life. So these are the questions I'm interested in. Anurag and Venkat, last thoughts, please. And really, Anirban, if you want to kick in after that. Just last thoughts and then over to Anirban. Anurag, please.
Over to Anirban.
Over to Anirban.
Any last thoughts?
Over to you, Anirban.
Okay. So this has been wonderful. So I will not even attempt to, try to summarize or anything, because we have discussed a whole range of issues, starting from the basics, going to basics. And that's where in TRI, we looked at what Anurag was saying, that there are so many things to do, but unless you fix the basics, the opportunity for the next generation, which Venkat was saying, that the challenge is intergenerational. Much of the people we work with today, there is only a limited window. The bigger window of opportunity is there with the unborn child, with the mothers who are going to be pregnant. So those are the places. So how can those be different? The next generation, how can they be different? That's where we are focused upon, that's where we are looking for solutions. And of course, initially it's interesting, Anurag said that when we started TRI, and Venkat has been part of that journey so strongly. So our hypothesis at that time was solutions are by and large there. they are not in the same place. It is like they are solutions, but they are not in the same box, not working in a targeted manner in the same geography. So as TRI, we initially thought we just need to create business processes, engagement processes for these solutions to come and work in the same geographies with the same communities, bring in agency and leadership of the communities to engage with those solutions and take it forward. But as we have in these 6 years of journey, we are increasingly seeing that there are big dark spots in terms of where solutions itself don't exist. There are lots and lots of solutions for the country, but looking at the 650,000 villages, and of which the bottom 100,000, 150,000, those places, the solutions itself are a challenge. And therefore, today TRI, we never intended it that way, but today we have more than 25-30 places where we are working deeply with communities like a grassroots organization, where we are looking at creating solutions in those dark spots, and of course bringing in existing solutions to engage there. But that has been a revelation that despite the 70-80 years of civil society engagement and deep engagement with communities, there are so many of those spaces where solutions are yet to come up. And with this shifting landscape, which I was talking at the beginning, that the world is changing. Like I was in Barwani, a program which has been supported by the Azim Premji Foundation, and in an interior part of that sub-district in where we work, there were young people, young boys and girls. Initially, we had trained them on an from an accountability perspective. We had trained them to look at digital applications using their mobile phones, to look at, in MG and REJ, what are the work sites which are happening in the village, what are the social entitlements which are happening in the village. So we started from a transparency, accountability frame, and trained some of these young boys and young girls to use their digital mobiles instead of playing PUBG, looking at these things and providing that information into the Gram Sabha. But interestingly, those people have moved from just getting information and passing on to actually helping fix the service delivery around technical challenges, say the Aadhaar not working, or the bank seeding having been made, there is a mistake in bank seeding. So all these things, young boys from interior areas, young girls from interior areas, they're able to do on the fly. So these opportunities which are there are young people. I saw there was one person who was constantly taking videos as we were, engaging. So later when the meeting was over, I was asking this boy, must be 16 or 17. He has a YouTube channel, and he has this penchant of looking at positive developmental things which are happening in villages. He captures them, curates them, and in his YouTube channel, he has been posting those. And there are people who are actually looking at. He shared the YouTube channel with me, and I'm seeing there are several, the views are quite high. So these are emerging things and the kind of deep insight they have on policy. There is this Matritva Vandana Yojana, and they were saying that actually the government is asking for the husband's name and the husband's age for the Matritva Vandana process to be processed. So the deep insight they have about public programs and public challenges is a new space, and we as civil society need to understand this better and leverage and harness this opportunity which is coming. So it was a wonderful discussion. My colleagues have been taking notes, and we will on 8 report back which are those items we like to integrate in our work on the ground. And this is a great, discussion which furthers the developmental discourse on these spaces. Thank you very much, Rohini. Thank you, Anurag. Thank you, Venkat, for your time. Look forward to you connecting to you.
Thank you to TRIF for all the work that it does and all the associations you were with. We need our civil society organizations to work more deeper than ever. And we need to flip the lens so that people can see. And when people can see that they have agency, then they can solve. Thank you very much. Dhanyavad.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.